Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
So back when you first got started in NYPD,
Yes.
what was New York like then?
Well, for me, it was home. So it was always what I knew. Crime was bad, but again, it's something that you're used to. There's areas that you don't go, there's areas that you do go. As a working guy, I was a construction worker. I worked all over the city, and I really never had a problem with anybody. But again, like I said, since the late '60s, early '70s, crime was murder in general. Because a lot of times when we talk about crime, you have to realize that bosses a lot of times can fudge numbers or change numbers. But one thing that you can't, and the constant is homicides. And we go by those numbers, or I tend to go by those numbers, simply because you can't hide a body. So you can't change a felony robbery to a misdemeanor robbery. You see, you can't change a felony assault you can change rather a felony robbery to a misdemeanor robbery, and or a felony assault to a misdemeanor assault. And these are the games that'll get played in the precinct and or in the court system. But you can't hide the bodies. If people are being killed, they're killed, and that's it. And so that's a very good way to check how crime is happening in your city. And for us, like I said, I think it was 1969, the first time that it had broke 1,000. And then year after year, it crept up until 2,000, 2,200, 2,300 mark, which was in the 90s. And yeah, that's when I was working at that time. And for me, as far as work, life, I lived in a decent neighborhood. I had a pretty good life. So it wasn't outside of, my school years. Crime was really not, an issue for me overall, because you're aware of it. It's something that you're used to, sadly. But the Bronx in particular was a wild place to work. There was a lot of crime, a lot of homicides. At that time, for instance, when I first started under the Things administration, I want to say we had something like 68, 69 homicides in my precinct alone. And that was the 5-2 precinct, which was only about a mile wide and maybe 2 miles high. Okay. The
Wow.
4-6, which was right below me, was a rocking little precinct. Okay. And they had, over 90 homicides that year. All right. Now the 4-4, which was right below that, was one cited as the busiest precinct in the world. Okay. And obviously that things were going nuts there too. But I always give credit to the 4-6 because the 4-6 was so small. It's basically 1 square mile. All right. And it was so small that, their numbers were astronomical. Now, during this time, once Giuliani, to get back to Giuliani, once he had taken over, he slowly beat those, not slowly, fairly rapidly. You figure within 8 years, those numbers were now below 600, So think about that just for a second, how you can go from, 22, 2,300 homicides to 600, in such a short amount of time. That's because people are doing the job.
Yeah.
And he allowed them to not allowed them to do their job. He made sure through ComStat, if you're familiar with that, it was basically a way that they tracked all crime in New York City and made precinct commanders, address their crimes on a monthly then weekly basis. So they were able to track things all the time. And it was really a great way to, I don't want to say force, but yes, force, precincts, the police to do their job, because they were able to track it and pinpoint things and set up, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm getting older now. I'm losing my words, but they were able to pinpoint trends. There you go. And, quite often cut them off ahead of time. So it was a great system.
Everybody does that. You do that in business. You do that everywhere. And it's like, how do you know if what you're doing is succeeding or not? Well, you got to look at the trends. You got to look at the data. And if it's not working, then you got to change things. And that's one of the things that drives me crazy about our society today. It's like, that things aren't working the way they are right now. And yet it doesn't seem like anybody's changing anything. All they're doing is basically, like you said, manipulating the numbers. And I don't want to say fortunately, but like you said, the only thing you can't manipulate really is the homicide, because it's you have a dead body.
Correct.
And drive-by shootings and carjackings and rapes and assaults, all sorts of those. I guarantee those are skyrocketing. Because to me, those
Absolutely.
are kind of the indicators, the leading indicators
Well,
that the homicides are coming.
absolutely. And when the sad part about that too, and especially for people in more impoverished areas, okay, is they stopped reporting. They stopped reporting crimes because of their, their lack of trust in the police, because it is so much part of their life as it goes. So yes, your robberies, burglaries, rapes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these crimes quite often, I mean, how many are half of them not reported? Are 70% not even reported because they don't bother picking up the phone call because it's life as usual? You know, it really is a terrible, terrible situation. So yeah, you do have to do the thing where you basically just, go by the homicide rate because that doesn't change.
Well, it's
It
even
can't
worse
be
than that,
fudged.
I think, because if they're just letting them out, it's like a revolving door. There's no bail and things like that. Then they know if they report this guy for assault or anything else, then more than likely he's going to be back out on the street and
Absolutely.
he's going to be pissed. And what's he going to
Absolutely.
do? The first thing he's going to do is come after me.
Yes. Absolutely.
So yeah,
Well, and
crazy.
now with this thing, we have it in New York. I guarantee they do it in Chicago, in California, and other ridiculous states where everything seems to be upside down. But part of what they're doing with bail reform is they're allowing the criminals to know, okay, all of the complainant's information. They actually hand that over to the lawyers and to the criminals. So
Hmm.
you know who it is that's where the complainant lives. They hand over the address to them. It is so unbelievably upside down.
That's crazy.
It is.
So
It
there's no
is.
more anonymous tips type thing.
Well, not so much that there are anonymous tips, but once we get into the court situation, you see what I'm
Hmm.
saying? Once it goes to court, once it goes to trial, all of the defendant, the complainant's information is handed over to the defendant's counsel. All right, so they know everything.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah,
Absolutely
that's
ridiculous.
exciting. So
Yeah.
if you have a rape charge or something like that, then
Yep.
I hear this poor woman is trying to do the right thing and get a rapist off the street, and her personal information is getting put out there that I'm sure, I mean, this guy's got more than likely has friends. So, oh, that's insane. All right, well, let's go back to the Giuliani years because that's when things actually worked.
They did. They
Most of
did.
your
They were.
time there as a
Yeah.
detective, were you narcotics? What were you?
I was predominantly narcotics. Yes. Most of my it had to do with the times in general. Most of my time in the police department, I worked narcotics. At first, in the precinct level, I was on a SNU team, which is a street narcotics enforcement unit. And then from there, I actually went to anti-crime, and then I did a little bit of time in a RIP, which is a robbery identification program. And then I joined the narcotics division. And at that time, actually, the Bronx Narcotics, probably is the same today, was the largest single command in New York City. It was a big, big command. And I don't know, we had probably, I want to say like 350, 380 guys just in Bronx Narcotics because, again, business was so good, you know? And
Hmm.
that's why the vast majority of my career was spent doing narcotics, yes. Narcotics work, narcotics related work.
So
Um,
give me an idea of what you went through every day.
Mostly everything starts out with a buy and bust operation, which I'm sure you're familiar with that, where
Mhm.
we would have undercovers who would go out and, you know, do exactly that. They would buy drugs 2, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times a night, whatever it is, and we would go out and immediately lock up the sellers. Then you take those sellers, all right, and you try to get more information out of them. And every once in a while, you can hook something, all right, and then get either a CI and or an undercover to actually get make inroads into these different drug gangs. And that would be a case. And then a case, you would build a case and work the case and see how far up you could climb to truly try to, hammer some bad guys, you know. And that could take sometimes, weeks, sometimes months, and you would build it up. The idea there and the problem there is, of course, how much money is the city willing to give you to go, and then of course once drugs and or guns and violence, you know, become part of the mix, well, then you got to lock people up. You can't let it go anymore, you know. And so, and that was, it was good work. In fact, for Just knowing how squad detectives work, and squad detectives are your true detectives in the police department, kind of like if you remember the old NYPD Blue, Sipowicz and that kind of thing, you know? I mean, a lot of those poor guys, they can easily have 100 open cases, that don't go away until you finish them up. And for us in narcotics, our cases are, are they selling drugs or aren't they? That's how simple it is. And if they are, you do your best to lock them up, So it was fairly simple work. Not when I say simple, it wasn't easy. It was very hard, very aggressive. And we locked up a lot of people back in those days. But it was, what do you
Well,
say?
when you say,
Go ahead.
when you say lock somebody up,
Yes.
what would a drug dealer have to actually do to get locked up? I mean, a certain amount of drugs. What would it take?
You mean to actually be put away?
Mm-hmm.
For us to lock them up, he just said, that's just selling drugs. Bang, we lock you up that night. But to actually be put away in the courts, quite often that's up to the judges, and it would depend on the amount of drugs and or the amount of arrests, okay, and or if any guns are involved. A lot of times we would actually try to intentionally buy guns off of drug dealers because judges don't like that, and they would get mad if there was, we had made 4 or 5 buys and then added a gun to it. Well, now they know that, violence and guns are mixed up in it. And so the judges take it more seriously. Back to, again, us not being part of law enforcement. It's up to the judges to enforce the laws, kind of what we were talking about before. So that being said, I think what you want to know is, yes, I've locked up guys, man, who have been locked up dozens of times. Okay. And it's once they hit that 4th, 5th, 6th time, the judge starts taking it more seriously. Guys who have already done time and have, maybe come back out, the judges again take it more seriously. But this quite often comes down to the judge. Again, how serious does the judge take his job? Some take it very seriously, some don't. Some are quite literally bleeding hearts and, try to see it from the bad guy's eyes, which in some respect, and don't get me wrong when I say this, I can understand selling drugs. If you have nothing else going on in your life, I get it. I don't understand sex crimes. I don't understand, a lot of other things, but that's something that I can understand. If you're poor and you're hungry and you want to make a few bucks, I get it, but it is illegal and we're going to get you, but I don't know if I answered your question there. I kind of went off.
No, it's just bizarre. I hear back again. I'm a student of history. I love reading about the past and then comparing it to where we are now. And then, you can extrapolate a lot of, there's a cause and effect that happens all the time. And everything kind of goes in cycles. You said in the 60s and 70s, even the 80s, that led up to the worst part, which was the early 90s. And then, everything was going crazy. And so the population finally demanded that something happen. Boom, they elect Rudy Giuliani. He comes in from the Manhattan DA's or the South Manhattan DA's office. And, this guy's been putting away gangsters and all sorts of stuff. And so he's kind of a hard nose, and he comes in and he says, all right, cops, from now on, you are going to do your job. And if you're not doing your job, I'm going to get rid of you. And so, he kind of, that kind of attitude comes down. And, again, you look back at the, I kind of compare Giuliani to like George Patton in the World War II. Patton, he took over the 2nd Armored Division, and it was in a shambles. It was pathetic. And he went in there and he started cracking the whip. And, if guys weren't at breakfast at a certain amount of time, then too bad, you were hungry. And, their boots had to be tied, everything. It's like, if you want to be a crack unit, you got to look like a crack unit.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.